Welcome, everybody. I think most of you know me, but I'm Benjamin Smith, assistant professor at the School of Architecture here. I just want to say welcome to the 7th and final Tulane School of Architecture lecture of our fall 2021 series, Debate, Delete, Reboot, Being Wrong in Times of Change. And this is our 3rd in-person lecture since pandemic times. So it's an exciting time, and I'm glad to see everybody in the room tonight. So this lecture series is meant to highlight the unintended outcomes, contrarian thinking, and humility of learning something new in the course of research and practice. Tonight's lecture is sponsored by the Azby Fund, and we thank them very much for their support. Tonight we are joined by Hernán Díaz Alonso for a lecture titled Incomplete. After his presentation, Hernán will be joined by a TUSA faculty member respondent for a conversation. The respondent this evening is Dean Iñaki Alday, who is the Dean and Richard Koch Chair of Architecture at Tulane School of Architecture. Together, Dean Alday and Margarita Jover have also founded a firm, Alday Jover Architecture and Landscape, which was founded in 1996 in Barcelona. The practice focuses on innovation and is particularly renowned for its leadership in a new approach to the relation between cities and rivers. After a discussion amongst the presenters, they will take questions from the audience. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand and staff will bring around a microphone. I'll probably be the person running around. So if you want to ask something, just look for me and I'll try to run something over. Now to introduce our main lecture, Hernán Díaz Alonso. I've known Hernán for quite a while now, and I just learned that he has been teaching at SCI-Arc for over 20 years. Is that right, Hernán? Crazy. I mean, I think I got to SCI-Arc in 04, so you'd been there a couple of years before that. When I knew Hernán, he was the new rebel faculty member at SCI-Arc, and now he is the director of the school. And so it's been amazing for me to watch his progression throughout the years at SCI-Arc. He is also the director and principal of HDAX, his architecture firm. And I promised I wouldn't go on and on about his accolades and achievements, but I do want to mention he is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Letters in 2019, an amazing honor, and we are very fortunate to have him. As a pioneering faculty member at SCI-Arc, please welcome Hernán Díaz Alonso.
As I said, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's get to it. So the work of the talk today is basically what we put together for the book that it was published right before the pandemic. Great timing for Thames and Hudson. It's kind of the work of the office that we've been doing in the last 12 years or so, with a couple of exceptions to that. And it's based on a series of basic ideas that we've been percolating around the work of the office, but is directly related with the work of teaching in SCI-Arc or be the head of SCI-Arc or other places that I taught over the years. So I always talk that the work that we produce is a triangle between speculation in the teaching realm, flirtation all the time as much as we can outside architecture, and a little bit of architecture here and there. To keep the ball rolling and to keep the possibility of the idea of design or architecture as a way of thinking and not necessarily just as that mechanism. So there have been a series of shifting paradigms that we've been obsessed with in the last 20 or 25 years. And I'm not going to go through all of them because there are many, but the last one I will say is the most important for us, which is the notion of image as the vehicle for the production of form. I'm a formalist. I've always been a formalist. I've never been into form follow function. I've always been into form follow form, whatever that means. Amen to whoever said you. So it's in that realm that the work how it has been our interest. Is in this notion that it has to do with an internal logic. It has to do with very driven by obsession, if you will. But also try to operate with what always been my interest had to do with cinematic effects and films and many other things. that they're not necessarily in kind of in the natural habitat when we think about architecture. So part of the work has been a different moment of evolution. I will call it the early work. I will call it experimental because we didn't know what we were doing. And eventually we start to work towards a much more speculative logic because we start to have control. So in a way, there was a kind of a partnership with technology in which in the early work that we were kind of following what everybody was doing, trying to figure it out, how to navigate the apparatus of animation software, all the things that were coming part of common knowledge. So there was almost the attitude, what can I do for you instead, or more like a partnership instead to try to control it. So like many other of my colleagues, we were trying to navigate the idea of the single surface, articulation, nerves, curves, and all those things. So when we did the Ps1 Pavilion in 2005, and this used to be kind of a big deal for a young architect. I always joke that you are a young architect as far as you don't build. So in many parts of the world, still consider a young architect even though I'm 52. I also would like to claim that I'm the most sustainable architect in the world because we don't build anything. So we are not adding any carbon footprint to the planet. So that's something that we can claim. But jokes aside, what you see now is animation in 2005, and what you've seen is exactly what we present to the jury. And we were trying to convey that we were not interested to use animation as a way to describe the project, but it was a way to articulate the project, to produce the project, to understand it as a kind of a cinematic experience. Very much borrowing for the first Alien and Ridley Scott that you never get to see the monster in the totality. So for ours, we were very surprised when we were chosen as the winner and they give us 8 weeks to build it on a very tiny budget. So this is what it looks before the opening, a couple of days before the opening. And it was interesting because we start to send images to our friends and colleagues, and a couple of people said about that image, oh, cool photo montage. And I said, no, it's a real thing. But it was interesting that we were getting, and this is before Instagram and all that, we were getting this realm in which images were artificial construction and people thought that they were parallel realities. And that to me was an interesting topic. The other thing was one of the first times that we started to use coding and algorithm to try to figure out how to assemble the almost 1,500 different pieces of the structure, which is a very, very, very stupid idea. We learned our lessons, but we figured it out and we put it together and it opens and it fall apart within 2 or 3 weeks up to the 2 months that was supposed to be up. In parallel to that, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the SF MoMA, invited us to do a solo show. And that was, again, when the work started to evolve what I call the cell time, the idea of mutation, the idea to start to create a species to walk away from typology. And because we don't have that many clients of architecture in the traditional sense, every time that we get invited to do these crossovers between art and architecture, we convince the museums to let us build or fabricate something. But the idea of the show was to be completely anti-pedagogical. So there was not a spirit to explain anything that we did. It was much more to convey a series of effects of these ideas that a singular cell can grow into multiple projects. And then you will walk into the main space that you will be the display system that we call it sangre, blood in Spanish. And certain things that we learned from PS1, like if you paint a fiberglass too fast, it will bubble up. So we start to do the things on purpose to start to use with decay. And slowly we start to notice is that we were trying to claim and reconvene a sense of authorship or a sense of decadence or a sense of humanity in working with the computers. In the office, and even today, we don't sketch. I don't have paper around. I don't have pencils around. We don't do many physical things. It's all in the computer. But it was an idea to start to figure it out how this can start to deploy into different mechanisms. The other thing that will happen in this idea of the cell system and create a species is something that I learned and installed from working with Enrique Miralles many years ago in Barcelona, which is the idea to work in families of projects, that the end of a project begins the next one and so on, and you can work in multiple projects at the same time. So in the same notion, when we were doing a small exhibition or a small display system for a museum, it will become the same idea for a competition in Sweden, or it will become another show in the Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna, in Austria. And in this case, we learned our lessons. So instead to make every piece different, like we did in PS1, we figured it out that we can produce certain micro variations that it will be enough to produce differentiation of pieces. But the other thing is we start to work to challenge the software. So instead to start to work with platonic or precise geometry, we start to explore what if we use particle system, what if we use liquid simulations in which it's almost formless and counterintuitive. So in a way, the process became more about challenging the discovery and to work really less on the precision that in natural form the computer would produce. So we produced it and we fabricated this in Kentucky. We put it in a box and we send it. It's all plastic, but then it gets chrome, so it has the effect that it's done in metal. And I have all legs, and the name is Pitch Black by the horrible, terrible Vin Diesel movie. I have this really cool effect of the monsters in the dark. So we convinced the museum to let us paint all the gallery black and to have these things floating in the middle. So in this case, animation was not used as a form finding, but then the idea was that the physical piece became a reflection of that animation. This is Matthias Campbell helping us in Vienna at the time. So we assembled, we put it together, and this was an exhibition. It's one of the few things that we've done that even, I don't know, 15 years later or 6, whatever it was, I still like it. I hate pretty much everything that we do after a while. So you cannot imagine how painful it's for me to do lectures because I have to relive all my mistakes. It's like watching pictures of, I don't know, high school reunion or something like that. But anyway, we did this piece, and weird enough, there was, I put the title wrong, but this took a new life 14 years later. Somebody in Shanghai is developing a 3D museum, and they like these pieces, and they asked us if they can do it there, and we told them that we were not interested, so they offered us to buy the files. They own the file, and they did this version of it. The only reason I'm showing is because it's also starting, like everybody is into NFTs and all these things. There are all these new forms of practice and commerce that we just don't know where it's going to be. And I think it's always interesting to talk about these things in front when there are some students in the audience, because it's also to start to explore what are the possibilities and what are the channels that you can find to your work. So in this one, we were not really involved. We sold them the files, and they invited us to the opening. We went, and this was the thing, and it was what it was. In parallel to that show, we were invited to do an invited competition for a guest house pavilion for Nathalie Salusis, an art collector and art galleries in Paris. She have a beautiful house done by a contemporary of oh my God, I'm running back. Anyway, a good modernist architect, and he has a couple of sculptures of Andrew Block, and is near the Villa da Lava of OMA. And she wanted to have this guest house art pavilion. So we took the concept that we were doing for the exhibition, and we figured out, can we do a house out of this? So part of the issue was try to explore possibilities, how you can use repetition and variation, so not every piece needs to be different. And we start to preload the singular cells with more information so it can articulate more possibilities as we move forward. So in parallel to that, we did the Art Institute of Chicago commissioned us a chair for an exhibition. And by the way, Sangre in San Francisco went to the Art Institute in a different mutation. So throughout the relation, the commission this us to do a chair, and we decided to play around with the famous the chase by the IMS. We decided to infect it by a virus and mutate it, and we did the design in 48 hours, and we fabricated and we sent it, which was not a good idea because you don't get to choose which project gets fabricated or not. These are not renders. This is a chair. I don't like it. But I didn't thought that they would do it, so we just played for 48 hours to say, okay, let's mess around, and then it got fabricated. We did 3 or 4 of them, In parallel to that, Alessi asked us to work on a tableware collection. And this was the first one that we did. These are the prototypes called Mutant Manners. Nothing happened with them. It was too complicated to fabricate, too expensive, I don't remember. But out of that, and the same family of the same mutants or the same monster, however you want to call it, we did this design for this installation in Selfridges in London, the department store. And it get us to more close to what the work is today, which I will call, over the years, I will call the agents of contaminations. I think all of us who've been obsessively working to computer, I think we all been looking for options to contaminate that. Because in a strange way, I would argue, drastic sophistication and butchery and rituals is most of the recent work. Because I would argue that if you think about it, if you think in terms of the Renaissance time and whatever, there was an aspiration to be perfect with imperfect techniques and tools. And maybe because it was a mystical component, I would argue. But today with computers and equations and math and software, we have these perfect techniques. But I think we have an appetite to produce imperfection out of it, or at least I have an appetite for that. So I think part of the issue has become what else we can throw into this computational, clinical, surgical, perfect world that we can start to emphasize with our things. So as I was saying, rituals, butchery, and rustic sophistication became topics that interest me a lot, and it still interests me. It has defined the work in the last 5 or 6 years, which is the idea. This was a competition for a media art museum in San Sebastián in Spain. But what was interesting about this project was many things I found interesting, but it was one of the first projects that we start to really relate with the context and make and play with the dirt of it and try to figure it out how different families and friction of different geometries can start to work together and have different forms. But also it reactivated my love for plans, even though I think plans and sections have a different role in our work than it was when I was a student in Argentina, drawing by hand in ink on Mylar. Because right now, I think plans and sections are, at least in the way that we work, are not generative at all. They're like MRIs, and we do after the fact to work in the three-dimensionality. We work, as I said, completely through cameras and immerses in the three-dimensional parallel reality, and to accept that idea that there are different moments of the real in the computer versus the real in the physical real, and so on. So the new family, it will start to add back addition, keep working on ornament. Any concept of contamination that we have, we keep adding. You will notice by now that we are incapable to edit things out. That everything that we put, they have more stuff and more stuff. So this was the second version of the second collection for Alessi of Mutant Manners. Again, it didn't go into the market, but right now we are working in a series of one of a kind of this collection of silverware for a couple of collectors. Now we figure it out. I mean, the technology has become very manageable that you can 3D print the metal and then polish it and so on. But we did bases and we did trays and a bunch of other things. Candle holders, out of that family of that notion of monstrosity, of that notion of speciation, competition for a museum in Warsaw in Poland. And in parallel with this quasi-art world installation crossover, with there is not architecture, it's not art, it's something else. We did another thing for the MAC, in this case, MAC in Los Angeles. We got invited to do an installation, so we decided to work with the notion of temporality and contamination and decay. So we work with the particle cloud, and we replace every particle with a flower, and then we hire a series of people who does funeral arrangement flowers for Mexican funerals, and we build this structure with these spheres. With at that time they were not iPads; they were before iPads. But the exhibition was in the summer in LA. It was supposed to stay up for 3 months. So eventually start to smell like a cemetery and get all this, and it collapsed. And you couldn't walk in, it smelled horrible. It's an idea that I stole. You may remember the Iñaki in the 96, one of the founders of the Fura del Baus. did the exhibition with meat sculptures. And by the third month, you couldn't even walk 2 blocks away. And I always thought it was genius. So I wanted, this was my vegetarian California vegan version of it, of the same thing. But what it was interesting is using flowers, it start to have a couple of things. One, allow you this idea that things can change and evolve and decay, but also it solved the problem of color for me, which I'm horrible with colors. I don't know how to work with colors. So I thought it was a cool idea. We create these ornamental structures and let it grow plants over the season. So this was the first version for a museum, no museum, it was more like an art and resident pavilion in Patagonia for the Thyssen-Bornemisza Vienna Museum from Francesca von Habsburg. She had this crazy idea to have these pavilions all over the world in very strange places. So we were in Patagonia, somebody else was in the Sahara, and somebody, anyway. And the idea was that it will be always incomplete. I call the lecture incomplete because I'm more and more in love with the idea of everything is incomplete, that each project is incomplete because each project is not really a project, but it's the genesis of the next one, and so on and so forth. Sorry, messages coming in. And these are dangerous because these are my golf friends, which they tend to say horrible things. So ignore that. Let me do something. Let me make sure that I close that. Okay, we're good. So again, in this idea of contamination, distortion, and rustic and rituals, I mean, rituals fascinates me because they have this capacity, low end, high end. It has this sophistication, but also has a primitive, brutal quality, which I thought there was a really cool way to get out of the trap of the computational purity. So this is a series of chairs and also benches that we work for. The chairs were for a famous German company. There was this unstable, but it was the first time also that we start to separate the skin from the bones and so on. This was a bench for the same woman in France. But we did a version for it for a friend in Argentina. And this was the one in France. And if you're a formalist, by definition, you work with abstraction. And I was being with a healthy envy, look at the artists, how they can work with the literal. Architects would never allow ourselves the luxury of literal. We always feel that we need to justify everything we do. This is Francis Malman, probably by now the most famous Latin American chef. He started working and cooking in a very primitive way, combined with very sophisticated techniques. So that was, this is many years ago, before Netflix or anything that made him super famous. So I was obsessed with that idea. And also it was at the same time that my first daughter was born. So I have this appetite and this desire to the literal. So we cows and sheep and animals. This is a conversion for the Untitled Pavilion. And we was only, sorry, too loud. We wanted to make it as much as we can as a series of cows and animals. But also to make the dirty. We never want to do render that look hyper real. We always look into this artificial. I love I love the visual effects movie from the late 90s when they were almost there but not quite there. This project, it's not really a good project, but it was such an open door to liberate ourselves for any kind of process, logistics, and so on. So I'm not interested. As you notice, I don't show you the process for anything. That doesn't mean that we have a process in the work, the way that we work in the office. But reconstruction of the different images, how you get there. And so that was the beginning where I will say it drives the work until now. And then we went a little very deep, like we were trying to get this meat sculpture done in Columbus. I bought, I don't know how many books of butcheries from all over the world to figure a different technique, which is very interesting because it's disturbing as hell. I'm not gonna deny it. But it has this quality of three-dimensional cutting, which is very interesting to work with computers. So we were trying to mill frozen meat outdoors, put the CNC outside, and figure out how to do this thing. We got into trouble because the place that we were trying to do exhibition, they were saying that they were complaining about the I don't know, protection animal, and we told them it's already dead animals. We're not killing them. We're getting from the butchery. Anyway, we didn't go. But that the whole cow architecture movement, that we were the leaders and only participants. Actually, Jason Bain from UCLA also has been part of the cow thing. Triggered a whole series of other projects. This was a porcelain lamp for kids. They're very small. They look like little cows. We did it in 2014. It was dead for a while, and now somebody reflowed the idea. So we are reworking that for a company in Limoges with this beautiful translucent porcelain. We did these little cows for JP Morgan Chase in LA. These are like remote control holders for meetings with cool people. It's very tragic and sad to tell you, students, that we got paid for these little remote controls more than we ever get paid for anything that we ever done. They're like this. We did only 3. And we asked for an absurd number, and they say, oh, that's cheap. Anyway, just saying. The cow literal contamination with ornaments and other elements. This coffee cup for Alessi. These are the metal prototypes. Actually, this is a newer version that we're working on right now, trying to get this thing going with a different company in Turkey. And we start to do a little bit more and more straightforward art. Tom Main wanted to have a piece of art. So we scan a popcorn literally, and we 3D printed, and we put some ornament. It's this big. This is not the render, this is the thing. And we did popcorn art, literal. At the same time, you work in other things along the way. Within Infonavit in Mexico, which is the social housing and the financial system. At that time, Carlos Edillo was trying to do an experiment that he did. Not expensive houses could be done in a creative way. So invited actually Michael Meredith, who lectured here recently, to do the master plan, and they invite a lot of architects. And Saya, we were part of that. So 10 of our faculty participate, 4 of them got built, but we proposed this. It was an idea to do, and I love the challenge. And we were working in an area of Mexico that has, is nearby a place that they use a lot of the water tanks in wood. So we thought that we can make houses and workshops out of tanks. And then we talked to the people in a company that does things for tents in the mountains and whatever, to do these roofs and to make it fairly, to do something interesting and also not expensive. So anything interests me about design. I mean, any scale, any topic, any budget. So we work with whatever people trust us, which is a very small group of people that trust us. But those who, so we embrace any kind of problem. And I think it's an important thing. And you try to figure out the ideas, but we don't try to downplay it. Like whatever the topic is, we try to work with this, whatever level of speculation, how much we can stretch it, and how we can operate. Mercurial chewing gum, this is the internal joke because Wolf Pricks always says that my work looks like mercurial chewing gum. And there's this couple in LA who want us to design their urns from when they die and then cremated. They're not that old, so it's a creepy couple. So we did 2 urns for each of them that it will be embedded with flowers. So whenever they're dead, they can put their ashes in. in parallel to that, with the carving and butchery and ritual, we did this competition for the Teatro Colón in Bogotá, in Colombia, in partnership with Juan Rincón. And the animation is a little bit deceiving, but we try to do what is the kind of the default Latin American competition, which is like a big glass box. That's what people tend to work on it. But we wanted to carve this strange courtyard. And actually, this is very common. I saw it walking around in New Orleans, but also something very common that you will find in the Gothic neighborhood in Barcelona and so on. So this idea, because the program was very tight, so we wanted to carve this courtyard, back entrance, garden with a happy monster, let's call it. But it was the first time that we really took seriously the notion of carving and this notion of butchery. But everything is kind of a Moebius strip, so you never abandon any of the ideas. In a way, I would argue that we all doing the same project one way or another. So the rustic sophistication, the primitive, the rituals. When Willy Mueller, who's the director of the Barcelona Regional, he commissioned us to do this pedestrian bridge that will connect at the end of Barcelona with San Andrés de Besós. Actually, technically, San Andrés de Besós to San Andrés de Besós. There is this small river that connects to the Mediterranean. So half is a bridge, half is a platform in an ecological reserve that is a species of bird and so on. So we went back to some of the original ideas of Ps1 with the notion of geometry and structure, but we wanted to make some like an elevated garden, like an elevated garden, a shanted garden, if you will. We worked with Klaus Boninger, this phenomenal German engineer, and he came with a whole series of concepts how we can make it work. So the idea was to create, as I said, yes, technically the function was a pedestrian bridge, but we wanted to make it more like a place that you want to hang around, that you just didn't want to just to cross from one side to the other. I'm going to flip to animation because it takes too long. So I think as I was saying, part of it was bridge, but part was this platform, they connect the thing. So the party wasn't going, they lost elections and we lost the commission with it. But we were exploring also the work with wood, and we wanted to have this kind of a sphere, so that's becoming like a recurring topic, this platonic geometries of the spheres, to have to put some species that are endangered in there. As I said, we were with Klaus Boninger trying to figure it out how with 4 modules we can create enough diversity. We also worked with Florencia Pita this was just a concept for a park in front of San Andrés de Besós, going back to the bridge. So this idea was then again to have 4 modules that would allow you to give you the flexibility to create effect that all the pieces are different, but actually it's not true. So it's about rotating them, and the idea was like the bamboo bridges in Asia or in India, that it has certain life. So we didn't want you to feel fearful, but we didn't want you to feel completely safe, that this was something in nature you respect. The Barcelona Regional also asked us to put a quick idea to connect the Barcelona Zoo with the Barceloneta. This project was never meant to be built. It was just a concept. And in this one, we went, since it was not supposed to be built, we went all in with the idea to do an elevated park. And so this was not the bridge at all. It was literally an elevated park. And we took a little piece of that, and we transported to a different bridge that we have in Jojutla in Mexico. We were asked originally to do, to do 2 plazas and 1 pedestrian bridge. And we proposed to the government to connect it to the neighborhood, to combine the 3 budgets into one thing, and we will do an elevated plaza. So the idea will be that you have the option to walk every day, cross from one neighborhood to another one a different way. It will be done in metal and wood, but also it will become this public space. So you can have quinceañera parties, you can have mariachi parties, you can have all the social events on the neighborhood. So instead to have two plazas with a bridge, we propose to do all the thing. We work quite a lot on it. So the project, I think OMA ended doing it at the end, and they did. Some, I don't know. I see something recently. So we were the commission did at the end didn't again another government changes is one of the big risks when you work in government projects that usually the new regime counts and tend to cancel most of the projects of the previous regime. We probably would have to go a bunch of other iterations to make it really feasible. But we were on our way to try to figure it out, and we were working with local architects, and actually Alberto Calach was helping us and trying to help us to figure out things, and Francisco Pardo and other friends in Mexico. So this was some of the drawings that we were developing for it. But again, the idea of okay, the ritual, the primitive and the sophisticated, both things at the same time, and trying to navigate. Okay, this animation is not playing, doesn't matter. The Helsinki Library competition, in which again, carving and those things, but we propose that the library will be in the X and the rest will be a park, because as we know, nobody goes to libraries anymore. They're public spaces. And a place like Helsinki can use an indoor park. Also for Infonamid, we work in a concept for an emergency house. And the idea was a simple one. It was a concrete block of a kitchen and a bathroom. And the rest will be a tent that you can expand or reduce, make it bigger or smaller according to it. As anybody who's from Latin America, you know that emergency houses became much more permanent than we would like. So we were really interested in working with that. So this notion, it brings me to a house that we are building in Argentina, in La Pampa, 6 hours from Buenos Aires, in the middle of nowhere, built with very primitive construction techniques, but we wanted to do something. And also I did in collaboration with Florencia Pita, who happened to be my wife, but we don't work together. So this was not an easy thing to do. So it's under construction, it's three quarters in. But again, it's about the negotiating things and what you can get away with it and where you can push. So it's not all the time that the formal language, well, in this one, as I say, it's a collaboration, but also to me is again, I'm more and more interested in developing a new language. We have a kind of high level of rustication, but at the same time, you know, you can only be done in power with the cinematic form, image construction about it. So how to navigate through those things and how to operate with those things and how to try to convey those things. This is probably will be my first and last build house. I have more interest in moving away from architecture than moving in back. But it's kind of fun. So we're doing all these strange things, and we were obsessed with trying to create the effect that the house already existed, and we are kind of borrowing and coming to live after, because the original idea was that. So anyway, the place is pretty cool. Going back to objects, this is a lamp that we did for the Italian company. Instead to do a lamp, we did the light bulb. So what if you do this? You can plug it anywhere. A flower vase, all part of the carving, primitive, rustic thing. A park in Shanghai, which is something that intrigued me more and more, the artificial nature artificialization. This is something we're working a lot lately. We're trying to get more into land art. We've been developing this mega basket. They are big as this, well, half of this room, to do in the middle of it. in the middle outdoors, and so it can become places that can be occupied in any way that people want. And we are doing actually, this origin was in bamboo, but then we thought that this can become the armature and then put concrete that can become this kind of a really funky skateboard place. This is an urban equipment, and we're working for a metal company that can be reproduced in a fairly generic way. So the idea is out of one single family. One thing has becoming fascinating more and more is the mechanisms of production. So how you can create system that you can replicate, and again, with the obsession for us of things to be highly speculative or very unusual and strange, but trying to negotiate with that. And these are the one I'm very, very excited. We call it the Sharpay Chairs. So we're doing a whole series of them in different qualities. This is one is in concrete, but the idea is to have some kind of irrigation system, allow them to grow grass in it. So when you see it in the park, you don't know if it's an animal, it's a plant, it's a bench. Sorry, you're supposed not to see it's not a company anymore. The company decided not to move forward. So this is now we are working with other people to try to put a couple of prototypes that we're planning to put in the house in Argentina and see how it goes. And it looks like a little pig. I mean, I don't know. I'm into animals a lot, and I want things to look at. But this is the idea, you know, you put in the park and you don't know what it is. But then we create a whole other families of Sharpay chairs. And as you can see, we like to stick flowers and everything that we can. Again, it helps with color. You don't need to think about color. You just choose cool flowers and take care of it. Of course, we put more hair, less hair. This is a prototype that was done in the middle of the pandemic. Still a long way to go, but it's not that bad. I think my favorite, is this one. So this one we're trying also, at the same time, we're trying to do the metal mold. We are trying to figure out this with artisans in the north of Argentina that do extraordinary mesh work. It's mimbre. I always forget what is the name in English. I don't know if Margarita Iñaki can help me. Okay, it's not like bamboo. It's like a tiny, let's call it tiny bamboo. And so there's these people in the north of Argentina that are really good at it. So we're trying to figure out what we can do with them. And again, to get involved. This is something that interests me more and more, to figure out how to work these things, but also mix it up. As I said, the rustic sophistication as a concept. These are the chicken chairs for kids. These are just plastic. I have two daughters, 12 and 8, and they like all this stuff. So I tend to confuse that my kids are good, but I think my kids have very strange taste. Like when they were kids and were finding Nemo, they were rooting for the shark to eat Nemo. My daughters love Darth Vader more than Luke Skywalker. So I don't know what to think about it, but they love these chairs. We also did a couple of collaboration with Koch Chair for big competitions in Asia. We're supposed to come with this idea for the flower towers, an expansion of Shenzhen. We work in this water park with them. Ours are the one with the bubbles. The other ones have Koch Chair. I show it because also it's fun. I think it's interesting also when you get out to your comfort zone and you have to work with other people and negotiate ideas and negotiate concepts. And it's bringing me to the end. Sorry if I'm speaking too long, Iñaki. So this was a competition, not recent, but a couple of years ago, for the museum in Korea, in which we went all in with this idea where I was talking about the three-dimensional gardens, the three-dimensional artificial things. So in a way, we were hidden the architecture inside this three-dimensional garden. So almost like all what it would be considered the building is hidden inside this armature that would allow to have all this vegetation growing around. So from outside, it would look like a mega tree or like a forest, and inside there will be the building will be hidden inside, which was kind of the evolution of an idea that we start to explore to the good Helsinki competition. I think everybody in the planet did, which it was in this case was not to hidden in the garden, but the idea to hidden similar to the Teatro Colón, to hidden in kind of a box outside, almost like a perverse thing. But also I think it have to do with this notion of mixing friction between species and not have a singular species dominating. But we go back and forth with that. I mean, it's never stable, and that's what I'm saying. It's incomplete because I like the idea of second guessing yourself a lot. I also don't like ideas that much. I like more getting to things. I always believe that simple, dumb, banal, everyday things can grow into interesting things. And I think if you have ideas that are too complex and sophisticated, to me, at least to me, it paralyzes me. So literal, okay, let's do cows, let's do carving, let's put eggs inside the bag or inside the box. That seems to work for me. So there is a kind of a children-like altitude. But children, when they play seriously. So I want to be very clear about that. So anyway, it will take forever, these animations. But then sometimes you go over the top too, which I think sometimes you need to look at the edge and go over the edge, and don't worry about the edge. And so other things that we were playing around is with the idea. Again, this was a competition for Ps1 in Budapest, but we start to build these movies in which the building have a life. So it's not that the building will behave like this. This is not what we do for the stories that we tell after. About the building. So that we have one reality that is singular one. And clearly don't pretend to be realistic at all. Anyway, the last thing I want to show you is what we are actually working more heavily these days, have to do with augmented fashion. Some of them have to do with healthcare. Some of them have to do with sport performance. Some of them have to do, this is, believe it or not, way before the pandemic. This was a pollution mask for the Asian market. And the idea was we were working with this company with sensors. So depends on the pollution, it will be, if the day was better, it will have a better color. If it was a bad day, it will be darker. But also we start joking, what if you're in a bad mood? So you can say, stay away from me. I'm in a good mood. You can come and talk to me. So we were playing around. We were, believe it or not, we were prototyping when the pandemic hit. And this company had to rechannel all the energy in doing real thing for health. So we were doing this corset when you have fractures. So the idea was, what if you treat illnesses or chronic conditions? Actually, it was not our idea, honestly. This was in a meeting we had a while ago. I think it was in Hong Kong, and there was this woman who is like the Vogue editor of some magazine there. And she told me and a couple of other people there that we should focus in health fashion, because there is an aging population. They had to deal with chronic illnesses, and everything looks pretty bad. And there was opportunity to create something cool, and she thought that it would be investment from companies. So we focused on that for a little bit, and we were, now that we're back, but not back, but the pandemic started, well, I think we are still in the pandemic somehow, but people are accepting. So we are going back into the prototype and working to put together exhibition. But also we have simpler ideas like these buttons. So you cannot afford a good jacket, you can buy 10 buttons and change the buttons in your jacket and make it a little bit funkier, or a zipper, or earplugs. I suffer from tinnitus. I have it 24/7 for the rest of my life. So I have to use air plugs when I'm in loud environments, and they all look very bad. So what if we transform them in jewelry? So again, it's a health issue, but they can be fetishized, if you will, or these are for pacemakers. People who have pacemakers have to have these sensors. So basically, I have a pacemaker. I'm proud. Look at me. I have one. What happened with the New York Times? Okay, good news. Omicron is spreading quickly, but it's less dangerous. It's part of the service that we provide in lectures as well. Healthcare report. And then we have this one is a little bit more dark and dirty. This is a colonoscopy bag vest for people who have to have a colonoscopy bag. Oxygen vests. We simplified now. This is the current version and we're working on it. So the idea instead to be carrying the tube, so there is a way that you can have the oxygen inside the vest. So this is a shoe that we've been working for a while. And now but the idea is that's how you get a shoe with all this hair. It comes with a couple of scissors, so you can customize it. You can give the hairdo that you want. You can have a very 60s ones. I mean, yeah, you can have like a total hippie one. I don't know, kind of emo, 60s, driving your bike, I guess. Grunge. And this is, if you cut all the way down, you still will have something that is unique. We try a whole series of versions with it. This is a recycled plastic one. But again, literal. Recycled plastic, can we make it look like recycled plastic and not try to make it look like a regular shoe? They were not so keen on the idea. But we are doing the prototype for an exhibition in London that they're doing the story of the running shoe. Candy one. So the last thing is this is a backpack that we're also working right now that it hug you, it make you feel better, make you feel happy and warm. And that's it. So this is an MRI of my brain. I'd like to show because at the end of the day, we're all the same answer. So, but I really believe that I think for everybody who designs our trying, I love this quote that Stephen Wright is one of my favorite comedians. If at first don't succeed, then skydiving definitely isn't for you. I like the idea that you try one thing, something, and sometimes it will work, sometimes it doesn't work. But I don't like the idea of being polite or being correct. I think you should try what you're interested in doing and try to figure it out how you can maximize. And if it doesn't work, try again and try again. And it may be all first try. I'm paraphrasing Stephen Wright. So anyway, thank you.
Well, Hernán, thank you so much. This is definitely out of my comfort zone. I feel really, Ben is a master of this. I'm actually not, but it has been fantastic to see your work and to enjoy this playfulness with lots of intentions. I'm interested. I think there will be many questions, but I'm sure you are director of SCI-Arc.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you you practice architecture
Then,
or you practice this. What is how you value the piece of the practice in relation to your academic career? What is that piece of research for
Yeah.
design?
I think it has many layers. I don't conceive for myself or anybody I respect or admire. Pretty much everybody I respect or admire in the world design, they all teach. So I don't think you can have an interesting way to operate if you're not involved in teaching. I think you need to experiment all the time. And I think it's great to work with students. I think it's super important to teach what you don't know. Or what I always talk to the faculty, do what you do to the limit. The practice and the reality take care of that. So I consider absolutely crucial. I cannot separate one versus the other one on a conceptual level. I think also there is a pragmatic level, which I will be brutally honest. And I think it's one of the many good things about this country. There are many other issues that we can discuss about that not so good about this country. But one of them is the notion that academia is a serious endeavor here that allow you to have a certain intellectual freedom that comes by to have the possibility to teach and speculate and think financially, but also intellectually. You have access to the latest technology. You have access to whatever is coming. So to me, it's absolutely symbiotic. I cannot separate one versus the other one. And particularly being involved in places side. I taught in other places and they all have interesting speculative characteristics, but SCI always has been my home in that sense because I like to think it's something very organic. But yeah, no, I cannot separate.
And following that, a question that I receive often, I want to pass it to you. Why you are director of a school? Why you get in that mess?
What is those who cannot do teach? Those who cannot do teach run the school. I don't. No. Well, yeah, but let me put it this way. I only be interested in being the director of SCI-Arc. I never been interested in being anywhere else, and I don't think I will ever be interested in running any other school. It was kind of a series of accidental coincidences. If you asked me 20 years ago when I started teaching SCI-Arc, this was something I wanted to do. I would say no. I wanted to focus completely in the practice. But being the director of a place like SCI-Arc is exciting because it's independent school of architecture, it's chess architecture, nothing else. There is no bureaucracy. I only have a board of directors above me, but that's it. So it's very fast, it's very dynamic. You get things done in a way that you cannot get done anywhere else, not even your practice. Even when you do products, it takes forever. In the school, you can do something and a month, 2 months, 4 months later, you see the results. So it's exciting, but also it's exciting because SCI-Arc is exciting. And titles are kind of pompous thing and so on, but for those of you who understand football, I always feel like you're the quarterback. You're not the coach. You're not the owner of the team. You're the quarterback. And I think that's a lot of fun. So, and that became part of it. I mean, I really think the school, with as much as has grown and became very institutionalized and way more formal than they used to be, it still have that kind of a California LA rebel spirit in which, in a well-sensed misbehaving is appreciated and encouraged. And also it's a school that still design is at the center of it. I mean, every person has been involved in the different role of leadership in the school. They're all designers. Yeah. We never have a professional administrator in charge of the school or anything like that. So, but why? I don't know. It was a series of things. It seemed like the natural fit. It seemed like the right thing to do at the time. And they were crazy enough to think that I could do it. So you should ask the board of directors, not me. But it has been the most interesting thing ever. I mean, to be inside. Being inside has been, and to get a chance to be the director, yeah.
Yeah.
The last 2 years hasn't been that fun, but it has been incredibly fun and exciting.
I'm not gonna answer myself. No worries. But going back in time, I know you work with Enrique Miralles years ago. Well, but
the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah, but I guess it was an important experience, and in a way, someone can see some glimpses.
Oh yeah, there's a lot. If you're familiar with the work on Enrique and Carmen, then Enrique Benedetta. Oh yeah, there's a lot of them in there.
Yeah. How do you explain that influence?
In many ways, I mean, I always talk mostly about Enrique because when I went to work at the office, Enrique already split from Carmen. He was already with Benedetta, but Caterina, his older daughter, was still 1 or 2 years. So Benedetta was in the office, but he was not full-fledged all the time in the office, like a little bit late. So my experience was mostly Enrique in the office. And I mean, I admire the guy before I went to work for him. He was my hero. I was talking with some of the students over lunch. Like today, students are different. If I ask the few students that are here, who's your favorite architect? They don't have one. I'm from a generation that you have favorite architects. You have 1 or 2 or 3, and you knew everything that they did. So I was like that with Enrique. So I always thought that to me, Enrique closed the analog culture and architecture. That I think nobody could push farther the 2D, the drawing by hand to the, that's it. That was it. Like Muddy Waters close, whatever, blues or whatever, I don't know, or Miles Davis, whatever. So I always say seriously that Colombian computers, animation software saved me, because if not, my work wouldn't be like a bad. Not that it's great, but at least it's mine. But it would be a very bad version of Enrique because I wouldn't know how to get out of it. So to me, working with 3 dimensions and cinematic, all that was a way that you can still you can see the influence in the geometry. You can see it in a way of drawing. You can even see in the way that I talk about projects. Yeah. So I mean it when I said Enrique never worked in one project. Enrique took one, that collage became the next one, and so on. So I stole that from him. But also I took something that for me is fundamental, which is taking the work as a joy and living as art. The few students who know who Enrique Miralles is, and if you don't know, please Google it after this. It will blow your mind. They always ask me, what do you learn? I always tell the story, which is, it was a Saturday. It was only 4 or 5 in the office. We were working this competition. And it was the famous, remember the UIA 96 mess Congress in Barcelona? It was a mess in the city. We were there. It was a big thing. Anyway, it's a long story, but I'll focus on this. So Enrique showed up all well dressed up. And he light up a very expensive cigar. And I know because I smoke cigars. And Ricardo Flores, who was his right hand at the time, says, Enrique, where are you going? You're going to a party? I said, no. Today I'm going to do a beautiful drawing. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know he dressed for a drawing, but to me that was one of the most important things, which is the idea that you had to be in the moment and really focus and be enjoying it and the joy of it. And he was, as I always said, also it was a good lesson about leadership, because in the time I worked, but all the people that work for Enrique adore him. And it was not because he was a great architect, because also he never shouted at anybody. He never got pissed off. If you did something horrible, he would say, he would call everybody maestro. Maestro, that's good, but let's try this. He will never get pissed off. And he built trust. So you will go to hell for him. I work for other people that will do it through fear. It doesn't work. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm a huge fan of his work. I'm a huge fan of Benedetta's work after he died. I'm a huge fan of Carmen. because that's a little bit is unfair. I think both of them play in the. I mean,
Yep.
but basically it was that the everyday life becoming cool. You know, like Icaria Pergolas is the procession of cabezudos. You know, like the Molière is like flowers and fruit on the table. So I stole that. I stole that idea that you take. I will never do butchery if I didn't work for Enrique. Like, you know what I mean? That, yeah, okay, yeah, you can look at butchery and do shit. So yeah.
We didn't overlap because I work indirectly with him through structures as a structural engineer. So I drove some of his structures, and when he separated from Karma, he came as a squatter to the office of the structural engineer where I was. So it was interesting to see him in first in a very tiny office with a couple of people only. And he gave me the thing he struck me. He told me, if you have something important in your building, do it with the structure, because then nobody will take it out. So and his buildings are structures basically, you know. And interestingly, you were saying that he's the one who closed the analog, but still in a completely 3D thinking through.
Oh yeah.
To the projections.
I mean, like every time that somebody dies so young, like Enrique was 45, like he did a lot by 45. But I was thinking the same the other day when Vince Lavlo died, or like Gustavo Cerati's music that I love. When people die young, aside I mean, in case of Enrique, was a personal loss, or people like also you think all the things that we missed, that we didn't get to see. Like I would love to see what Enrique would have done with all the technology that we have today. What it would mean to his work. Maybe it didn't mean much. Maybe he will stick to his gun, and I don't know. Yeah. But we will never know. So yeah, there is something horrible about what we miss collectively and culturally when we lose people like that so young.
I have a last comment, sorry, or question. It was interesting to see how you are talking about your work in these families of projects that are very strong. They have very strong threads. They are not random. Yeah. They are extremely creative. You don't edit anything out, as you say.
I don't.
But but you see like very strong threads on that. And at the same time, you say that you are not interested in ideas, that you are interested in doing things and extracting from that. No, so can you explain a little bit more about this kind of concept of craft in the?
Let me see. Sorry, maybe I'm not interested in ideas. Wrong. When I'm saying I'm not interested in big ideas, I like ideas, shit stuff. But I think idea doesn't mean anything if they don't take you in doing stuff. So I believe in do stuff and to the discovery of that. So it was complex for me after I graduated from Columbia, New York, my master. I was in the peak of architecture and Deleuze and Guattari and philosophy. This is 98, 99. And I felt like I needed to be like that. I needed to be like a philosopher. All right. Sorry about that. And it took me 2 or 3 years to figure it out, like basically to say, fuck it. This is not who I am. I do stuff. So I think it's tough in liberation. Now, you develop a method, you develop a logic, you develop a way of working. But I like to think that is more like cooking or making bread or whatever. Like somebody said recently, he was actually a sportcaster. I thought it was super interesting. He was separating bakers from chefs. The bakers, when something goes wrong, they go back to the book. It's all precise or whatever. Chef is just throw my salt, more this, more that, and see what happens, right? Until they figure it out. And you will not find one chef that will write you a recipe. They will never give it to anybody. When they do a book, they always leave something missing and so on. So that's what I meant by the idea that I'm more interested in the process of discovery. It's one of the reasons I never have a partner. I never work with a partner because I was reading the other day. I was walking in and I like that it's a lot of people read your hands. And I like it because I have a very clairvoyant way of design. Like I know how the thing I want it to look. So it's all about discovering. And I drive the people who work with me crazy because I'm trying to explain it. And I swear, every time that whatever we do at the end doesn't look at all what I thought it would be. But I convince myself that yes, we got to the point that I thought at the beginning. But it's through the doing stuff. But yeah, I believe in do stuff. I always tell the same story. My father was very good friends with Julio Banzo. Julio Banzo was a painter in Argentina, not a great painter, but he was the best friend of Lucio Fontana. Lucio Fontana, again, this very important artist. And I was 14 or 15, and I would ask this guy, Banzo, Maestro, how I can learn to paint? And he will tease me for like, I kid you not, 6 months. I'll tell you next week. I'll tell you next week. I'll tell you next week. So one Saturday says, Hernán, come to my atelier and I'll tell you what is the secret to paint. So I go there all excited and look at me and says, okay, you want to paint? Yes, this is the secret. What? You have to paint. But it's true. I mean, you have to put there, yeah, somebody can teach you a little bit of this and that, and you learn and so on. And this is what I think is important when you're in school. You should be focused on doing the most interesting work that you do. I think sometimes in schools we get trapped that everything needs to be justified. And I hate when people say, oh, that's arbitrary. Everything in life is arbitrary. What is not? But somehow, collectively, we have said that a 90-degree angle is not arbitrary. So if you do 90-degree angle, you don't need to justify much. But if you do a couple of things, automatically you have to justify yourself. And I think sometimes we cripple the imagination of people. And I think maybe it's better to see where it goes. And then I'll meet you at the end.
Let's open.
Hi. I wrote down my comments and questions so that I could best deliver them to you.
You're gonna have to speak a little bit louder. I can barely hear you.
Okay. So firstly, a comment. Undeservedly, beauty is sometimes thought of as a dirty word in architecture today. Any attempt to evaluate contemporary works in terms of beauty and aesthetics might sometimes be considered shallow or unacademic.
Yeah.
So first, I'd like to say that I really appreciate that you unashamedly speak of and utilize the concept of beauty as a driving force behind your projects. Perhaps not the single driving force, but an aspect that is as important as everything else, however intangible or ephemeral that it may be. So I love that you're concerned with elevating architecture beyond the mere functional to be enjoyable and pleasing. In reference to new paradigms, advancements in parametricism, computerized 3D modeling, and digital fabrication techniques allow for the production of architectural ornamentation with an economy and efficiency like never before. Intersections of psychology, neuroscience, and architecture give rise to a reconsideration of and questions regarding ornamentation in architecture and the functional roles that it may play in the experience of a building and the psychological impact of those who experience it. Some people in the field today postulate that these forces are giving rise to a kind of new sympathy, if you will, towards ornamentation. So can you comment on this further, please? What do you think is the future of ornamentation in architecture? And to what degree do you consider your work ornamental?
Okay. Well, send me your coordinates. Next book, I'll call you for you to write. You explain what I do way better than I do. But very good. And thank you for the comments. Let me just say one thing about that thing about beauty because I think it's important. Look, in academic discussions, things go in cycles. Right now is a cycle in which beauty is not really that much at the center of it. I think if we allow that to happen, we're making a mistake because I think somehow, for some reason along the way, we confuse beauty with expensive or luxury, something which is, I find it strange. I think beauty and aesthetic should be considered a human condition like anything else. And I believe that most of designers, we are driven by that obsession. Whatever our definition of beauty is, and it's not the same for everybody. So that's very interesting about this time. So never stop pushing for that, for whatever your version is, and never let anybody to tell you that that is whatever it is. I will not go that far to say that it's a human right like anything else, but why not? We should discuss it in those terms as well. In relation to the ornament, parametric, and parametric also is a loaded term. I never consider myself really into parametric that much because I mess around with computers a lot, and I'm not so obsessed in the precision of the process like other people in parametricism. And by the way, I think everything that you design has parameters. So technically you can argue that any designer is parametric really. But in terms of the ornament, for me, one of the most interesting things the computer brought to the table is the idea of what I call, sophisticated people call it hybridization. I call it blending, which is the idea that you can throw many concepts that they don't kind of fit together, but computer allow you to do that. Like you can throw romanticism, rationalism, and something will come out. That you can trade things about minimalism or maximalism and ornament, and something will happen. So I don't think ornament means what it used to mean or what it was defined by. I think for too long, and still maybe today, architectures invest so much energy in this versus this versus that. I mean, you know, minimalism versus ornament and so on. I think ornament is a tool or a quality of design like any other thing. And I think sometimes you push for it, sometimes it doesn't. What I think is fundamentally different is ornamentation today has the possibility to be much more three-dimensional. So it can be way more aggressive and less passive. So it doesn't need to be something that is flat and 2D attached. So when you do that, I'm not so sure the definition of ornament is still applied, because I think it maybe became something else. But at the same time, I think we should be in a time of design that we should avoid. I understand the categorizations and concepts are useful for communications and to teach and so on, but I don't know. I mean, I think certain projects ornaments make sense, some of them doesn't. So I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm interested in garment or ornament, because in fashion there's a certain speed of things that people are less judgmental. I mean, architecture is so moralistic about everything. Like it's always religious. My God is better than your God. Like you're selling out, you're not selling out. This is commercial, this is not commercial. And most of their creative fields don't care about those things. They just do it, you know? So the future of ornament, it all depends on all of you guys. Some of you will be interested in ornament. But again, it's like everything else. I think it's cultural. I don't know, again, it's my first time in New Orleans. I only have a glimpse. But this seems to be like a very ornamented culture, and it seems fascinating to me in terms of what it means in terms of the horrible history of this country, but also the good things that come out of that and everything in between. And that's a legacy and how we start to build into that. So I will take it as a cultural agency that is material for you to work with anything else and to liberate yourself from whatever preconception we all have. And every institution has. I mean, mine include. I mean, like SCI-Arc, we have our own. We have our own preconceptions. You know, like every place has preconceptions. And I don't know. I think we are in an era that we should get over those things. But I'm not so sure, as I said, as we move forward, that ornament, as we know it, it will define what it is moving forward, because I think it has other possibilities. I think there have been phases that has been highly ornamental, that there was something that interests me a lot. I think the most recent work is less ornamental, I would argue. It's more, if it's ornamental, it's three-dimensional ornamental, so it became something else. I think the most recent work I would call it convoluted, more than ornamental. But some of the early work was definitely ornamental. But it was trying to be ornamental in three-dimensional way. And there was a little bit of, we did it because we could. So there was a certain immaturity to it, which I'm not sure I will do now. But it may look ornamental for everybody anyway, so I don't know. So it's always interesting how one think about your own work and how people see your own work. Like I look at this, and for me, the recent work is very different than the work of 10 years ago. But maybe for all you, say, oh, it's all the same. It may be, I don't know. But you should write, man. But don't do a PhD. That comes from my hardcore technical modernist education in Argentina, form, follow, function. Enough. Nobody wants to be an architect. Look how great that bathroom is in the right place. Who wants to be an architect because of that? Anyway, sorry.
Now, if you look back at the founders and the quarterbacks at SCI-Arc,
Yeah.
I just wonder how much of a tradition there is there. I mean, what do you inherit when you come into that line
A lot.
there?
When I became the director, I don't know if this happens in many places. It was the only place that all my predecessors were alive. That's a weird thing. And when your predecessors are Ray Capi, Michael Rotondi, Neil Denari, and Eric Moss in that order, it could be intimidating. So you feel the weight of the legacy, but in a good way. I mean, SCI-Arc is also, we were talking with Ben, who is a SCI-Arc alum. It's also a lot of mythology. I mean, SCI-Arc is more normal than people think it is, or it was. But I'm fortunate enough, I mean, Ray Capi unfortunately died a year and a half ago, but I was good friend with Ray, and a good friend with all of them, and Tom Main, which is also one of the founders. And the spirit is there. I mean, the school is very different 50 years later, but the school was funded at this laboratory in which design, so in many ways it still is there, but also there's things I didn't know. Like talking with Ray Capi, SCI-Arc, yeah, it's officially Southern California Institute of Architecture, but in his head was science architecture because he was obsessed with NASA. He was obsessed with the space race and all that. So he wanted, what does interest? And so it became this place almost by default about being in LA. And so it was not in a vacuum. SCI-Arc was part of, and it still is part of a long-term experiment that is the city. So it's a beautiful legacy. I think you try to grasp with them. As I said, they're all alive and they're around, and two of them still teach in the school, and the other one is a regular visiting. So they're there. So it's like living with ghosts, but alive. But at the same time, each of them did something remarkably interesting. And all of them, one thing that they all have in common, it was this idea that you're a quarterback, that you cannot make the school one-liner, that you have to have all these different points of view. And as I said, the only rule is whatever you do, do it to the limit and beyond. And if you go to the line and cross it and look back, and there is the line. So it's fun, but also it's great because you can call them and ask them and say, what do you think about this? And we don't think about the same. Like I get fights, good fights with Eric and Tom Main all the time about my view that architectural thinking versus School of Architecture. And I keep saying that architecture is just one part of what we do. And they're both architecture. I said, no, I don't agree with that. So, so we have all these arguments, but at the core, there is an appetite to what is possible, to check what else is possible. And that is very much alive. And I think it's going to be alive and it's going to keep going, hopefully, for whatever the school can keep doing it. But it's also not that difficult. I mean, it's not that strange. I don't know, maybe it is strange for everybody outside, but I don't know, I've been there for so long that it feels like second nature. And they all have, and again, there is a lot of mythology about it. And at the end of the day, all these people that they were a bunch of misfits at one point, not all of them, but the big chunk of them became super successful. So they were not really that misfit, really, when you think about it. So they find a way to channel their energy and their ideas into something. But I think the school is moving, and the next 50 is going to be different as well. Like the whole field is changing, and it will keep changing. Who knows? It's interesting because when the board told me that I got a job, I started calling all my dean's friends to listen what they had to say, even though they're deans inside university, which is a different thing. So I talked to Monica Ponce de Leon, which now is a principal at the time was in Michigan, Bernard Schuming, he was dean in Columbia, and Wigley, and this and that. All the the most interesting advice was given by this guy who's not really a known guy, who teaches in RMIT in Melbourne, but he was in the AA around the Alvin Boyarsky times in the 60s and 70s. And he told me that the job of a good dean was the school had to have 3 or 4 ideologies competing for the soul of the school. And the job of the dean is to not let any of them win. And in a way, when I look back, that's what all the directors of the school did. Say at any given time, there were 2 or 3 or 4 camps fighting. That's what I was saying is so moralistic. Even though SCI is supposed to be this radical place, it is, but it still is a radical place. I always say that it was a cult that became a religion. Every school of architecture is kind of a religion because it's like, this is our truth, which is kind of insane because it's the most objective discipline. So it's a religion of individuals. Each of us, architects don't like what any other architect does. Like I guarantee you, Iñaki is being polite, whatever, but he look at this and this is. I mean, you tolerate some of your colleagues more than others, but you very unlikely you love. I mean, you love 2 or 3 maybe. So it's kind of strange because every place in that sense is the same. So yeah, I don't know. I give you a long answer to a short question, but I don't even know if I answered it.
We have one more. And yeah.
Hi, Hernán. Thank you for that very eloquent lecture. It was great. I have a question, I guess, related to the role of digital. The digital tools have, in a way, liberated you in form making. And in architecture schools, we teach, to think through plan, to think to physical models, which, as tools, they seem obsolete now, right? Like in the way that you work, one could say. So in terms of representation, I do wonder what is the role then of, you saying like, it is kind of like an MRI, cutting a plan or a section is this kind of violent thing that is no longer necessary. So I do wonder, you as summone that is pushing limits of formalism and also of, traditions of architecture, I do wonder, is there, such a thing as, a plan or, a section being obsolete?
I don't think anything is obsolete. I think at the end of the day, you have to find what it works for you. If you asked me this 10 years ago, probably will give you a different answer, but I'm a little bit older, so I became more calmer about things. And you learn that you figure it out, again, what works for you doesn't work. So I think there are people who physical models makes a lot of sense for them to work. It doesn't make sense to me because that's not how I see the work. I see the work really well in the monitor and I got accustomed to that. We do physical models, we show some of them, but usually we do it for exhibition or because somebody wants to see it. But I don't work on the model. But if you think of somebody like Sejima or Frank Gehry, is crucial for their work. The same with plans and sections. I like plans and sections. I don't design in plan sections anymore, but when I do it, I like to fetishize them and work on it. I don't think anything is obsolete or anything is, I think you just need to add colors to your palette. And I think you should not discard anything in advance, and you should figure out what it works for you. You know, like in music, I don't know, like I love a lot of electronic music, but I still like listen to the Stones way more than I listen to electronic music. You know what I mean? But it works for them. It doesn't work for other things. So if you ask me, I think anybody who's a young architect, young student architecture, my personal advice to you, not advice, suggestion is you need to be like a DJ. Sample everything that is available to you. You know what I mean? Like if you can find, you know, like if you are whatever, Beyonce, you're gonna be sampling Jimi Hendrix maybe, or even something farther. So why limit yourself? So what I think is, to me, you have to find what it works for you and what it feels, not obsolete, but what would feel unnecessary. But also, I'll tell you, when I was a student, which was working by hand before computer, I hate doing physical models. So I never liked physical models. I did it because they were required, whatever, but I always like to work through the plan. My sections, and still today, my sections are horrible. I don't know how to do sections. I divided the architects in the old school architects, plan architects and section architects. Enrique Mirages was a plan architect. The section was a byproduct of that. Wolf Briggs, Tom Main, Zaha Hadid was also a plan architect. Wolf Briggs, Tom Main, section architects. Of course they do plans and section, but not, Frank Gehry, neither, model architect. If you look at the plans or sections from Frank Gehry, are not interested at all as drawing. He doesn't care about drawing, he doesn't celebrate drawing, he doesn't celebrate models neither. He doesn't do fetishism of anything. He thinks only about the building. That worked for him. You know, I don't know. I don't think there is one way. Like I remember when I was younger in 2000, we all hated MBRDB, Winnie Mass, and all of it. And the last 4 or 5 years, I love what they're doing. Because did they change or I changed? I changed. So you start to learn that I don't think, but I have faculty in SCI-Arc, like Sumin Ya and she and Damian Jovanovic. In faculty meeting, they will say, it's criminal that we're teaching plans. We should not be teaching plans anymore. And you have another group of faculty say, how dare you? And my job is let them both fight for it and learn the students to figure it out. Look, eventually, I don't think plans are obsolete. I think it's your way of working. But do I think plans are the most viable tool for design? For me, no. Do I think it's the most viable tool of design for the future? Probably not. But it's not changing as fast as we want. Unfortunately, the design culture of technology, it goes way faster than the construction technology of design technology. So there is a discrepancy there that we still have. The moment 98 already people were talking about technology, construction design is going to collapse into one thing. Not yet. Cities are starting to accept 3D models as legal documents, but not quite yet. So why not? Now, what I would argue, and this is maybe where I get in trouble with our schools, I think a school of architecture need to be more like a school of medicine. When you go to medical school right now, they don't teach you like 1910, because 1910, 80% of people die who went to hospital. They teach you with the technology today and say, this is how medicine works today. Now, by the way, later, we're going to teach you 1910, just in case You have a hurricane and you don't have light and you don't have electricity and you have to save somebody in the street. We're going to teach you how to do that. But we're going to start from what medicine is today. I think sometimes in School of Architecture, we go the opposite. We're going to start in whatever, and we're going to come all the way to today. That I'm not sure that that's the right way to do it. So, but some people disagree with me. We need to teach plans. I respectfully disagree. We can teach plans later.
Wow, fantastic. I think we could be going on and on here for a long time, but we probably need to close. It has been fantastic. Has been an amazing close of the lecture series. Thank you, Jesse, and all the committee for putting this together. Thank you, Hernán, for
Pleasure.
being
My
here.
pleasure.
And it has been, again, fantastic. Thank you all.